And I'm going to say good evening, good afternoon, good morning. I'm not quite sure what time it is where all of you are, but it's very good to see you. I'm Marion Pallister. I'm the chair of Pax Christi Scotland, and I want to welcome you all to our special event on Colombia. Our members in Scotland will know that we've forged a relationship with Colombia because of our concerns about Police Scotland's contract to provide training for police personnel in the South American country. And our concerns arose after we had campaigned to halt a similar contract with the Sri Lankan government, which allowed the regime there to whitewash human rights abuses. And no sooner had Police Scotland terminated that contract than we learnt that they were similarly contracted to the former regime in Colombia. So we've had many meetings with Police Scotland over this issue, bringing the organisation Justice For Colombia and human rights activists in Colombia into our conversations. And Niall Finn is with us this evening, and I'm sure that he'll have something to say a little later about that. So we've spoken to them. They continued that contract through to the new government, not so new now, and that government still has a lot of work to do, but we now learn that Police Scotland has terminated their contract. So confusing for us, but our concerns are for Colombia's progress under the new government. And of course, we continue that and we pray for peaceful progress. And to begin our evening, therefore, I'm going to hand over to our chaplain, Father Jim Clark, who will offer a short reflection and prayer to start us off this evening.
Good evening, everyone. I thought, obviously, Colombia's in our minds tonight, but there's so much happening in our very disturbing and broken world. I thought I would pray the prayer that's been circulated a lot recently, the Universal Prayer for Peace, which comes from the Iona community here in Scotland. Lead us from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead us from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead us from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our lives, our world, our universe. Peace, peace, peace.
Thank you so much. We have got so many people that we have to keep in our heads at the moment, and it's I think that we've all found the past couple of weeks quite heartbreaking in so many ways. I would now like to introduce Martha Inés Romero, who will give a reflection on that situation in her country, in Colombia, from a personal and a Pax Christi International perspective. Martha has been Secretary General of Pax Christi International since January of this year. She's based now both in her home country and in Brussels, which is quite a juggling act. Martha is also Pax Christi's regional coordinator for Latin America and the Caribbean. She studied conflict transformation at the Kroc Institute for Peace in the United States, and she was a member of the Catholic Peace Building Network. She's contributed to the transformation of Catholic teaching through promoting a culture of peace, non-violence, and reconciliation, which is what we're all about at Pax Christi Scotland and Pax Christi International. So may I hand over to you, Martha, and Let me just, there.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Good night, good evening, good morning for everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it is very good to know the solidarity that people from Scotland have been always expressed to Colombians, that although there was a peace agreement, peace accord, it continues a lot of violence in our country. Let me present a simple PowerPoint to guide my conversation today. We, as Pax Christi International and as the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, have promoted scenarios for peace, for reconciliation, for social cohesion. And it is the way in we are working in Colombia, but most of that we are implementing a process with 11 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean to confront violence, especially the violence coming from extractive industries, from a nonviolent and conflict transformation approach. So let me present some background about the situation, what I see these days. There was a good information. We have a peace accord in 2016, and there was a new infrastructure or architecture for this transitional period with the jurisdiction special for peace, the Truth Commission that we have the privilege of having Father Francisco here tonight, and the unit for the search for persons presumed disappeared. There have been many challenges, and until now there are more than 400 former combatants killed. Some of them have abandoned their places that they consider they were the place to the process of reintegration to the society, and of course there are other legal multi-actor dispute for social and armed control in urban and rural areas. The implementation has been slowed down for the past 6 years. Now with this current president, there have been a new era in terms of budget, in terms of politically commitment with this issue. The land dispossession continues being a structural problem, that it is in the first point of the peace accord. There are multiple forced displacement continuing every year. The issue of inequality, the low development rates, especially in the rural areas, and higher levels of poverty. There is a rapid expansion of illicit crops. This is something that it will be tackled of the first time with the governmental development plan, to look for alternative processes for campesinos, for peasants in the regions. There's a traditional weak institutional framework, and there's still a high levels of corruption, some of them influenced by the narco traffic, the drug traffickers, but also from other ethical issues. The non-guarantee of the right to life, and it is something that it is affecting all our, especially rural leaders, indigenous, Afro-descendants, and also socio-environmental leaders. There's a lack of access to justice. There's a lot of impunity, 97% of impunity. There have been social mobilizations from before the pandemic, and after the pandemic they continue. So now with this new government, there's a lot of hope in the maybe those demands by the people will be listened, and it will be concrete in some policies that tackle with these structural issues. And as I told you, in Latin America, but it is also in Colombia, the issue of mega projects of extractive industries, mainly mining, but other agribusinesses and others. So the current government has stated that the total peace, it is its policy for tackle with this situation. For our understanding, is a very audacious initiative. it has been approved by the Congress when there was the majority of people supporting this in the Congress. So it is legally approved now, and it includes the insurgency, the ELN, and other small groups that maybe didn't follow the peace accord before, and the complex issue is other non-political illegal actors. With the insurgency, it is the political negotiation nowadays in the process with the ELN. With others, it is the proposal to submit to justice after some kind of agreements on how to do it. So we feel that it is a peace as a state policy, of course, with a lot of obstacles, and because the opposition have very strong promoted the polarization, many fake news within the people in Colombia. There was a very good experiment in Buenaventura, a place in the Pacific, where there have been some agreements between two different gangs, but it is so fragile for now. Responding how the communities are resisting and are building some reconciliation scenarios. First, the creation of safety environment. So some of them have self-protection rules or protocols, some of them very clear, such as the indigenous guard, for example. And it is something that it counts because in the field there's a lot of complaints about the armed forces, the legal armed forces, and it is in the past, so there's no enough trust that it is something that the Ministry of Defense have been working hard in creating a lot of trust with communities. Then the need to create some spaces for narratives and catharsis, and it is important to say that it is the first peace accord in the world that have a special chapter dedicated to the gender issues. It was not easy to get that. It was thanks to many women's organizations and networks going to Havana, promoting this issue of not only to say that there were human rights violations against women in the war, but also by all parties. And also these narratives are putting a lot of attention on generational issues, and they are trying to reconnect as a sense of belonging of communities. Some of them are working in trying not to displace, to keep their culture, rituals, their faith, etc. There are many organizations supporting and accompanying communities, not only faith organizations, but of some others accompany this idea of how to learn to dialogue with the other, with the different, in order to create trust amongst communities, including some demobilized now in the communities that were affected by the war. So for sure, there are other initiatives in strengthening the local and national platforms to speak up by themselves. And as Pax Christi and others, we are supporting those advocacy initiatives at the local and national levels in many ways. Some of them related to environmental issues, others related to the human rights, because we are really concerned about this issue of the existence, the persistence of violence in the field. As I told you, more than 400 people killed, former combatants killed after the peace accord. So it is something that counts a lot. So we put a lot of attention about how to support local communities and their power in many ways. So as Pax Christi International and many others, we are supporting the active nonviolent approach in terms of how communities have abilities and also practices in conflict transformation, in dialogue, in negotiation, to think about how to trace, to build, to design their future amongst all of them. Because in terms of how to strengthening, there is a fragile sense of citizenry. So it is something that we are promoting. The issue of the community identity, as I told you, there's a sense of belonging that we are strengthening a lot, many people. Then the issue of resilience and resistance, very linked with reconciliation. There is no way, if there's no reparation for victims, how to heal all traumas caused by the war and the violence that continues, how to strengthening those cultural rituals and the eco-spirituality, the connection with the Mother Earth, the connection with other traditional, for example, the ways that they have to express solidarity in exchanging seeds and in supporting each other. And the issue of life projects, how to promote the leadership. And definitely these days with the tragedy in the Holy Land, we see that women have a special role to play in our peace approach. The issue of the communities, they see in the future how they want to be. So they are protagonists of designing their change. We identify the talents in the communities and the solidarity and cooperation, because we are connected, as Fratelli Tutti did said, we are connected each other. So how to connect with all international community, with all people in the global south. These days, my colleague Alejandro Garcia was in Indonesia for the global forum on mining, and it is the way that South-South solidarity is building day by day. So I would conclude that there is a conciliatory spirit amongst Colombians. There's a search for consensus, a willingness to respect democratic rules, and an intention to carry out major social, economic, and political reforms. It depends on Colombians, but also on others. So there's a tension between these communities in itself. In pre-electoral time, like now, we will have elections for mayors and governors next Sunday and other bodies. So there's a lot of polarization and fake news coming from those who want to have people polarized, divided. So this is what I want to present, just to continue the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us those insights. I think that it's such as every country is, there are so many things to be worked on, and it's interesting that your information about the legal armed forces was part of what we were concerned with when Police Scotland was involved in this. But interesting also to hear about the gender issues. There was a press conference today at the Synod in Rome talking about women in leadership, and it's interesting to hear that your country is pushing that idea of women's leadership, and I hope to see that continue. So thank you so much for that. As I said, please put your questions and comments in the chat before you forget what you wanted to say. And I'd now like to introduce Father Francisco de Roux to hear about his peace-building work in the region. Father Francisco is a visiting fellow with the Georgetown America Institute and a Colombian Jesuit priest. he's an economist and philosopher as well. And he is the chair of the Commission for the Clarification of Truth, Coexistence, and Non-Repetition. He's widely recognized for his work towards peace building, reconciliation, and dignity for the victims of the Colombian armed conflict. So may I hand over to you, Father, and we will listen with great interest.
Thank you, Marianne. I hope you are listening to me. Can you hear me? I am using my telephone because I'm in Cartagena, Colombia, and we have difficulties because I'm storm here. Are you here?
We can hear you and we can see you.
Thank you.
All is good.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Father Dean Clark, for your prayer. And thank you, Marta Inés, for your very coherent and clear presentation of what's going on in Colombia and the impressive work done by Pax Christi in Colombia. And thank you also to Pax Christi Scotland, because this project of yours, working with helping our police in Colombia, with the experience of the police in Scotland, in order to transform our policemen and women into an institution protecting human rights and educating civilian culture among us, it being very effective and important. My idea is to give you, introduce a reflection about what is going on in the world everywhere, especially in Palestine and Israel, Ukraine and Russia. A reflection located in our experience in Colombia, because we are more significant, as Marta Inés was expressing, when we are talking about our personal life, sorrows, and hopes. Yes, for several decades, I have been working in Colombia, sharing with victims and survivors in my country. The numbers are impressive. More than 120,000 young people who killed each other in combats between soldiers, guerrillas, and paramilitaries. And for every combatant who died in the war, 5 civilians died. So there are about 600,000 killed in the war in Colombia. Doing a comparison, we have now about 7,000 killed in Gaza and Israel. And we have in Colombia more than 9 million survivors. Among them, 51,000 kidnapped people. 121,000 disappeared. At least 18,000 children recruited for the war. More than 7 million displaced. Each of them is a person, a subject with dreams, illusions, hopes, love, family. And they have lost all of that. Coming from this tragedy, I would like to point first to the absurdity of the war. Pope Francis, and you in Pax Christi, you have been working on it very hardly. Pope Francis said that the war is always a failure of politics and humanity. In our country and everywhere, the war starts from the accumulation of problems. We must solve social and political negotiations. But instead of dialogue, leaders decided to launch the war. And once the war starts, nobody knows when it ends. The world always degrades and deteriorates, and the most affected is the civil society. The families that didn't want a war. The war never resolves the problems. The war destroys, damages everything it touches, starting with the actors launching it. Hamas, Netanyahu, Putin, Zelensky, in Colombia, the FARC, and President Uribe, and the Colombian army. The war produced admiration for the military mighty, the passion for seeing the destruction of the enemy cities, the idolatry of the military heroes, the confusion of the military ethics based on prestige, honor, power, technology, money, far away from people and the mystery of God. After 60 years of internal armed conflict everywhere in Colombia, using the claim of the community, claiming stop the war now, stop it everywhere. The second point is the obligation to stand by the victims. In this moment, the brutal suffering of the victims, the cross of the victims, paradoxically, is the occasion of the maximum revelation of the mystery of the God of our Lord Christ. To achieve this, to get the revelation, it is enough for us to have the courage to abandon ourselves to total vulnerability and silently contemplate the children, the mothers, the bloody bodies in the images we are receiving from Gaza and from Israel. From there comes the force and the wisdom for compassion and solidarity in effective nonviolence. Now we must stand by the suffering and to receive their pain and to wait from there. In Colombia, everywhere, when the victims take their place and their empowerment, they are the ones who have the moral authority and the legitimacy to demand ceasefire, humanitarian dialogue to release all the captives, restoration, not only for them, but of all the people destroyed by the war. And in some cases, the grace for the mystery of forgiveness. The third point is the relationship between truth and nonviolence. The objective of our Truth Commission in Colombia is being the future, a future of peace for Colombia. And the means to achieve peace is truth. The truth of what happened during the conflict. Truth is an essential element of nonviolence. As you know well, Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography is titled "The Story of My Experiments with Truth." The truth that produces peace is clear and independent. It invites understanding of what happened to us in the human tragedy of our conflicts. Collective understanding, instead of producing hatred, stigmatization, or revenge. From there, we established in Colombia a method for the clarification and the acting of truth. The first idea, the first point of the method was the listening to the victims and make the society feel their suffering. And so for 4 years, we were around the country. We listening. We received more than 30,000 persons and communities, indigenous, Black people organizations, women everywhere. And we question the society with the suffering, presenting all of that at the television programs, the news, documentaries, theater, radio station programs, all the time asking the society, how is it that it happened to us Colombians? Where were we, our presidents, the Congress of Colombia, the universities, the teachers? Because the tragedy was such big, such immense. After questioning the society, we receive not only this first truth from the victims, their suffering, the suffering of the mothers, of the children, of the people who have been kidnapped, but victims, after present their witness, their testimonies, they want to see and to know the truth. And they were asking us, we want the truth, we want an explanation of what happened to us, why we were persecuted, why they came for our land, what were their interests, what were they pretending to do with us? How is it that we are here in the middle of a war we didn't want it to be in? And then the commission started trying to analyze and to understand the reasons, to compare different explanations, and finally to arrive at several important, significant truths. And we presented it openly, clearly, without taking any importance of the cost of telling the truth in Colombia. The first point is the commitment in conscience. After establishing the truth of the human tragedy, we must answer the questions of the victims. And especially, we place to ourselves a basic question: what we are going to do so that this hell does not continue? And we produce the recommendations based on the testimonies of more than 30,000 personal conversations with the victims. We received more than 10,000 concrete, specific recommendations in towns and villages. And we concentrate in what is the most important, the most significant, the most pertinent. This is because our recommendation contain only 10 basic points. Thank you, Marta Inés, for this presentation. But I would like to concentrate in the point that I consider be the most important. The first of them is what we call the great peace, which is not only the peace with the people who are fighting with weapons, but we have to start with confronting and transform a society which is much polarized and using all sorts of confrontations among them. And the idea is to try and produce sort of national agreement in the basic points we need for reconciliation. A second important point, which is very important, not only in Colombia, but everywhere, is please don't allow the weapons take the control of the agenda. To be more clear, civil society, victims when they are empowered, women organizations, indigenous organizations, Colombian Africans, we have to be very careful in never allow the combatants, the guerrillas, the military to take control of our agenda. This is exactly what happened in Gaza when Hamas took the control of the agenda. This is what happened in Israel with the government in Israel. And this is something that we have to prevent. And in Colombia, we have demonstrated that it is possible. We have done that in several regions in Colombia. Not allow the military or the guerrillas to take the control of the agenda. Maintain the control of the agenda in the civil society all the time, in the organizations of peoples, in women organizations. The other important point is all the time to work for the inclusion of the excluded. Obviously, women, especially rural women, but also young people in the big cities in Colombia, the indigenous, the African Colombians. They, by the way, are the people, especially the Africans, Colombians in the Pacific Ocean, and our indigenous communities, they are the ones who have the capacity to preserve the land and to maintain the environment, the protection of the environment for the future generation in our country. But they have been excluded, as Marta Inés was telling to us. And fortunately, the new government is following the recommendation of the Commission and is doing an enormous effort to include the indigenous and the Africans, Colombians. The other important point, and this is because, and this is why the project of Scotland, Pax Christi, was so important. We had, and we are working for the transformation of our security system. The police officers and all the people in the army in Colombia. As you know, we have big ethical problems in our army. The more difficult demonstration of this, the more impactful demonstration of this is the presence of what we call false positives, when soldiers of the army, but also commanders and even generals recruited poor people, insignificant ones, poor ones, and they invited these poor people to give them some sort of labor. But they were killed by the army, and they were presented as combatants, terrorist combatants, killed in combat to get military rewards and money. And they received rewards for doing that, to demonstrate that they were winning the war in Colombia. This is a very sad reality. It's one of the worst crimes in Colombia during the war. And also our military and part of our policemen were working with the paramilitaries in Colombia, the one that produced the biggest massacres in the country. So imagine after the United States, this is a finding of the Colombian Truth Commission, after the United States, we have in Colombia the largest, the best equipped, and the best trained security system in the continent, in America. And we have 10 million victims. A proof that the security system in Colombia is not working and has produced an immense human tragedy. And we invite you to help us to work in this way. In my opinion, this idea of solving the problem by the war or protecting the status quo by the war is always a mistake. And unfortunately, is what is going on in several parts in the world. And we need Pax Christi to insist, to persevere in this idea of working for peace and everywhere. The other point we really insisted was in the transformation of the war against the campesinos growing cocaine into a total transformation of the rural area in Colombia with the rural reform or integral rural reform. Marta Inés has already referred to that. The transformation of the education in Colombia. You know, starting to introducing in our programs of education the history of our tragedy, our victims for decades. Not only the good thing that we have built up in Colombia, obviously, there are a lot of good things in Colombia, but we have maintained in silence the reality of the suffering of our people. It is exactly what you need, for instance, to understand what is happening between Gaza and Israel. To clarify, how is it that finally you arrive to the present situation? What happened at the beginning of the last century? How the conflicts accumulated because we never solved in political dialogue the conflict that were growing. And finally, we decide to go to the war when the war is unable to solve any sort of problem and complicate always the problems. And the other point is the introduction of an ethical transformation. This is also quite an important problem for us. And I think that Pax Christi could help us enormously there. You know, we need in Colombia a sort of civical ethics or public ethics. We need to identify the values that help us to grow as human beings, to respect each other and to respect nature, and to identify the things and the actions that destroy us as human beings, and to enter together in protect these values, independently of if you are Catholic or Christian or indigenous or women or atheist, something that we are going to protect together, centered on human dignity and the protection of nature. I invite you to work together, not only in Colombia, but everywhere with this purpose. Thank you, and I really want to enter in dialogue with you.
Thank you. The statistics that you give are heartbreaking, and it's very distressing to hear confirmation of the military's lack of ethics in the past and perhaps carrying on into the present. And I can hear your passion in talking about not allowing the military to take control. Your work will, I'm sure, be of not just interest, but of great concern to those in Scotland who are supportive of human rights in Colombia, including ourselves, of course, the trades unions and the organization Justice for Colombia, with whom we've also got very close ties. I'm wondering, should we, having questioned our police, should we be encouraging them to not to have given up so soon? I'm going to hand over now to Grace Buckley, who's going to lead our question and answer session. And I know that we have with us a couple of people who have been very involved in the work that we've done. One is Hugh Foy, the other is Niall Finn, and I wonder if Grace might go to them first. Grace, over to you. You're in charge.
So she having given me my instructions, yes. Thank you so much, Father. I have to say I do identify with the need for us to actually relearn the ethical values that make us grow as humans. And that doesn't just apply to Colombia, but throughout the world. I look at some of the things which happen in our own countries. However, we could have a whole night talking about that. Can I ask, first of all, Niall Finn, if he'd like to ask his question to either or both of you about new Colombian government's work with human rights activists? Niall, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Grace, and thank you, Marion, for the invite. And thank you, of course, to Martha and Father Francisco for some of their really excellent and powerful presentations on the issue. Just a little bit of background about who I am. So I work for an organization called Justice For Colombia, which is founded by the British, Irish and Scottish trade union movements to support peace and human rights in Colombia. The issue of Colombia, I find, sometimes goes a little bit under the radar in these countries. So the reason, well, one of the main reasons we exist is because Colombia is the most dangerous country in the world to be a trade unionist. But it is also the most dangerous place in the world to be almost any kind of human rights defender. And Colombia accounted for, I think it was more than just under half of all human rights defenders killed globally last year were killed in Colombia. So that's some background about who we are, what we do. We were working with Marion and Hugh and Martha at Police Scotland, at Pax Christi, sorry, on this issue that's been mentioned around Police Scotland training Colombian police. My Pax Christi colleagues were really useful in these discussions, helped kind of bring some real insight and authority to the discussions. They didn't let Police Scotland fob us off too easily, which is what I think their default instinct was to do. But the reason we were concerned about this is because the Colombian police have a really appalling human rights records. They basically have a doctrine of treating protesters as an internal enemy. So this kind of leads to like widespread killings, sexual violence, and kind of very grim punishments, such as the targeted firing of tear gas canisters into people's eyes as kind of punishment for coming out onto the streets. Police Scotland could never really explain what assessment they had made of these issues, and eventually, as Marion mentioned, went on to cancel or not renew the program, which kind of says a lot about their kind of lack of confidence in what they're actually doing, I think. And maybe other people could talk about that. But my question really is about the new government in Colombia's efforts to, it comes from a background of social movements, and they've made a real effort to appoint human rights activists into positions of power. So, for example, now the new defense minister, who is in Colombia, the Ministry of Defense is in charge of the police, and the new defense minister is a man called Ivan Gomez, who has a long track record of working in human rights and corruption issues. So my question really is asking about what influence the speakers think this policy of appointing activists to positions of power is going to have. Thank you.
Okay, over to you, Father, if you want to take that.
Okay. Okay, first of all, I appreciate a lot the work you have been done with labor unions in Colombia. As you said, more than 3,000 syndicalists in Colombia were killed during the war. And the suffering of the families, the workers' families, have been very hard. And trade unions in Colombia diminished immensely because of the war in the country and the persecution from the paramilitaries, especially used by the industries to maintain security into the plants. I have to say also that the guerrillas also penetrate or try to penetrate the unions. Is complicated situation, but by no reason this is an explanation of justification of killing workers. You referred also to the internal enemy. This is one of the most complicated issues in the world, and it's just the explanation to eliminate the principle of distinction between civil society and combatants. And our army created this idea in the training of our army that there were around internal enemies they have to persecute. And instead of giving protection and security to all people in Colombia, they decided to take part and to consider that there were those that were not protecting the status quo were the enemies, civilian people who were just doing social protest or social claims for justice were considered as internal enemies. And this is something where we try to address very clearly in our recommendations. And in my opinion, the President Petro is being very concerned on the point, and also the new Minister of Defense. We were expecting that the police officers were independent from the Minister of Defense and to create with them a really civil organization. But for the moment being, it had been impossible. But I have to say that President Petro is really working hardly to overcome all these ideas of internal enemies and also to incorporate communities, the indigenous, the Colombian Africans, women, LGBT people, the youngest. But the situation is quite difficult. And probably one of the reasons is the division in the society and the necessity. And I would say that is probably my criticism. I obviously support the intent of the president, but in my opinion, we need he to open himself to receive in an open dialogue, as he did at the beginning, with all the society as a whole, and to understand that when people criticize you, people are not attacking you, but people really, in many of the cases, obviously, you have people that really want to get rid of President Petro, but there are a lot of people that really want to enter in a national conversation. And in my opinion, we need to invite, and you could help us to invite the president to open himself to a national dialogue. This is a very crucial moment for Colombia, the experiment of total democracy we are trying to live now in the country.
I would add to Father Pacho de Roux that we have this president, a former guerrilla man, who for the past more than 30 years have shown a peace attitude and decision to move to a more democratic society. And he has incorporated in the development plan many of the demands by the movements, social movements. And we have, for example, as Neil said, Colombia is the first country in social environmental human rights defenders killed in the world, followed by Brazil and Philippines. So we have now a green agenda. We have signed the Escazú agreement, etc. And many of these good intentions have many challenges. Not only because it is the first time in more than 200 years that there is a leftist or more, I would say, progressist government without any other power experience. So we are learning, and the government is learning. Second, there are many challenges because the powers that have still the power in many ways, not only economic, but also political. There's every day an obstacle to every proposal that the president, the government, or the people at the Congress level do. And it was reflected at the beginning. There was a very good agreement with traditional parties, and we have the taxes reform approved and the development plan approved. And then there were many evidences that there were not, the corruption is still in there. So this agreement was broken, unfortunately. So now there's no majority in the Congress. So some of the reforms that are waiting in the discussion, including the reform of justice to tackle the impunity issue, have not been easy to approve because there is no majority in the Congress. So there are many challenges for this. I think people are very polarized. There are many fake news, so it is not proud to inform that when President Santos decided to ask Colombians if they agree, if we agree with the peace accord or not, they not won with a small percentage, but it won. And there were many lies saying that if the peace accord was approved or signed and ratified there, then the payment for retired people were taken out directly to the payment for the immobilized guerrilla, and many lies. So there is a narratives in that, damaging any intention of promoting a national dialogue or a national harmony life. So for sure there will be many more obstacles. There's one challenge for social movements and civil society organizations, and it is that because there is the government from this progressist proposal, many of the leaders have been co-opted as officials in the new government. So it is good because there are good people there, not always with good experience, but social movements and civil society organizations are weakened now because many of them are now in the government. So it is something that we have to be aware, and we have to monitor. It is not a blank check for the government, because we are civil society organizations. We are citizens to control, to monitor, and to support what it is supportive, and to criticize what we consider it should be. In terms of the question about how extensive is support among young people for the drugs trade, I think there is a big gap in education and in equal opportunities for all in Colombia. It is the highest country in Latin America, but I suspect it is amongst one of the more excluded people in the world, according to the Gini index. Between those with more opportunities to finish education and to get a job, with a big amount of people who don't have this opportunity. And it is
easily taken by drug lords in terms of promoting a culture of violence, but also to promoting a culture of quick and easy money. So it is something that we need to tackle, and there are many good initiatives in changing the culture for a culture of violence to a culture of peace, to a culture of ethical principles that I think it is something that we have to work with. And in terms of the ethical issue, someone say this week, it is not a war between Hamas and the Israeli government, but it is not between Putin and Zelensky, but it is a war against spiritualities. The spirituality of the gold, of the money, and the spirituality of the ethical rules. So it is something that we as a movement, global movement, are working really hard in the ethical perspective.
Thank you so very much, both of you, for that. I think Hugh, you had a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I think perhaps just a bit of context for us as well. We began this because we had an event, and one of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace mentioned the documentary Keeny Meenies, and that there was a Scottish police training involvement, as you know, and we campaigned around that, and we were successful, and the Scottish police force withdrew from that paid arrangement with the government. And because of that, we were invited to then replicate that, given the Scottish police force's connection to what was happening in Colombia under the previous government. And I think one of the really important dynamics for us was when we met with them, we only agreed to meet with them again if they would meet with Colombian human rights activists. And I think that was the crucial qualifying dynamic for us as peace activists, that we were able to be in a room where the lived experience of Colombians was able to speak truth to power to a Scottish police force that were either being utterly disingenuous or utterly naive, and perhaps on different occasions both. I think the situation changed when we were then in the space of a new government and what the dynamics were, and wondering how could a police force perhaps be useful to the new government in terms of hearing what the Colombian people and those in the positions of authority in Colombia thought. But it was also in the light of it being admitted by the Scottish police force themselves that they were systemically, institutionally racist and misogynist. And so at that point, it would be difficult to continue to dialogue and wonder, what is it that they were bringing to this Colombian government as an institutionally racist police force that could be useful? But in reality, what we are trying to do here is to try and hold to account through peaceful activity and dialogue an international relationship which is predicated upon the assumption that all governments, by simply entering into these relationships, will improve. And the danger, of course, is always that it's a way to wash the realities of what the situation is on the ground. And that was always our concern. I think it would be easy to ask lots of questions more about Colombia. We've heard a lot, but actually I have a question that I think as an activist and other people here might want to ask, because of the tragedy that you have experienced and the tragedy of what is happening in the world, and the sense of powerlessness and perhaps hurt and fear we all feel. And I suppose my question as an ordinary activist to Francisco and Martha is, how have you maintained your own humanity when you have been confronted with death and suffering of people you love on a day-to-day basis? How have you as activists and as people of faith and as citizens managed to hold on to a sense of hope and dignity when you are faced with such evil? Because I think many of us in the world are struggling to try and hold on. So I'd be really grateful to hear how you have both done that.
Good question. Thank you for your question, and thank you for your comments. Okay, I really want to listen Marta, Inés, but just to tell you that we don't have alternative. We have to stand by the victims everywhere, and the victims from all sides in the middle of this irrationality of the world and this sort of crazy presence of weapons everywhere in the world. We have to stand by the victims. And because there I see, I don't know, how do you think about that? But there are really the profound dimensions of our human being victims in Colombia, especially when they came to the peace conversation in La Habana, Cuba. They were the first who, after presenting their suffering to the perpetrators there, paramilitaries, military, and the guerrilla FARC, after demonstrate the way they were brought down by the suffering and the capacity we have as human beings to destroy, to humiliate the other ones. Victims started telling all of them, each one in his way, we are not only that, we are able to see directly to the eyes of each other, to advance a hand, to invite to reconciliation, to build up a future for our children. And this was very impressive. And because of that, I keep hope. And especially also because, you know, in order to get peace in Colombia, my conviction is that we have to increase trust. Trust is really the base of reconciliation and peace. You never, ever get peace through weapons, but there is always a way to building up trust. And women are fantastic on that. And indigenous women, but also Black women in Colombia are giving us a lot of perspective on there. Marta, Inés, I want to hear you about that.
Let me begin with these two experiences from myself. 20 years ago, I was working for Oxfam Great Britain for Colombia and Ecuador, and I went to the Community of Peace, San Jose de Apartado. And then we began an experience of narratives, storytelling about their histories. And at the beginning, they were really closed, and then they were open to tell us their stories. And almost 98% of them, victims, have been children or grandchildren of people displaced in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So there's a large story, a long time story of many pains, many heart-touching stories. Then, when I was working part-time for Pax Christi for Latin America, I was a consultant, and I was hired by the Organization of American States to evaluate the demobilization of paramilitaries organized with the MAP OEA, the mission from OAS. And then with my colleague, we went to 9 cities. We interviewed many people, and I'm a teacher, most of them formed by the popular education by Paulo Freire in Brazil. So I implemented those techniques and methodologies to open their hearts, to look at them, how has been this process of demobilization. And in these workshops, there were people from individual demobilization from ELN and FARC, but most of them are from paramilitaries, from the AUC. And as a conclusion, most of them I would say 97, 96% of them had been victims in their childhood or in their young life, affected by all of the parties, including the legal army. So this is a story of Colombia that shows how affected we are for many generations. Two delegations that went to Ukraine from Pax Christi International last year, and the last it was in this February, there were identified more than 200 non-violence tools, methodologies to resist to the war, including healing the wounds of victims of perpetrators by Russians, healed by Ukrainians. Of course, the objections to take arms from the two sides and many others, around 200. But this is what we don't know in the media. We see only the war, the weapons, how violent are Colombians, for example. So I think you have analyzed the main straight to the point issue. It is the issue of the ethical issue, the dignity of all, and the way we have to learn how to tackle with those narratives, to recognizing the other, the dignity, no matter if it is a perpetrator or a victim. So this is something that we are promoting a lot. We consider with this tragedy in the Holy Land, we consider the active nonviolence should be implemented strongly. And this week there was a beautiful miracle, and Cardinal Bow from Myanmar, who have been really supported by many, including Pax Christi International, produced a statement that takes, I would say, without any arrogance, many of our messages on nonviolence. It will be published soon. He accepted to be published, this statement, so we will be sharing with you on the role of active nonviolence to heal the wounded, no matter if it is a community conflict or a big conflict. But the issue is, there is I feel that coming from Latin America with those extractive corporations, there is an answering this question about that is there economic or political pressures from outside Colombia that negatively have influenced the situation. For sure, there is a corporate responsibility in influencing in many ways, including those corporates of the weapons industry. They are a strong negative influence everywhere. And everywhere is, including the European Union in the due diligence law, including the European Unions about Ukrainians, etc. And I think coming from our Catholic tradition and faith, the issue of the Laudate Deum, insisting in corporations in the way that they're doing their businesses, it's something that we can tackle. We could work on that. There were a lot of money from Sweden and Norway to train the military for the past 20 years, and also other countries. And when I refer to polarization, the military in our armed forces, in the police, they are also polarized. In the Havana, there were many good people from the defense ministry acting together with the government, dialoguing and negotiating with the guerrilla. And we know they continue doing so. But there are other side that it is heavily influenced by these traditional powers, influencing that, looking at this current government as a communist. They don't call the president Petro, but the guerrilla man or other bad things. So it is something that we have to tackle. So to tackle with this, we suggest to work in 4 dimensions. and we are working on that. The first dimension is the personal dimension in connecting with myself, with the divinity or whatever I have as a spirituality approach, the Mother Earth, etc. The second is the interrelational, that there are many works in social cohesion. The third is a structural, that you, Neil and Hirsch, are working in to change the policies, the practices, the budgets, etc. But the fourth one is the more difficult. It is the cultural dimension of change. It is quite difficult because it demands a lot of work, efforts, resources. It takes more than one generation to change those perceptions and ideas and behaviors that we consider as society could change. So it is something that I would be promoting in the future, to work more on that, these four dimensions at the same time, because they are interconnected.
Thanks, Martha. I'm very much aware that we're running out of time. We have probably two questions that haven't been answered directly. One tacks back into something you were talking about, and that is the situation in South Africa. Marion points out there's a backlash against truth and reconciliation processes because people think it lets someone off with what they've done. Can you learn from that process, do you think, Father Francisco, in Colombia, that people don't think this is an easy cop-out, an easy option for those through truth and reconciliation?
Excuse me, Grace. I didn't get the point. Could you please?
In South Africa, they had a truth and reconciliation process, but a lot of young people, it's a backlash now from them saying this lets the perpetrator get away free without paying a penalty. Can you learn from that in Colombia and ensure that the work you are doing is shown to bring justice as well as peace?
No, it's quite an important question and always difficult to put together justice and peace. And just to answer this question, in Colombia was created the special jurisdiction for peace, the GEP, and they are exactly now in a very critical point. They are about to pronounce sentences to the military that produced the false positives in Colombia, who killed innocent people and innocent young people, and they are also to produce sentences to condemn the guerrillas. And this is going to produce a big discussion in Colombia, because transitional justice, which is the justice connected with peace, and this is a point also in which we need your support, Pax Christi. I mean, to put together peace and justice, you have to enter in a compromise. And instead of having the penalties of ordinary justice, where a war crime has to pay for all of your life in prison, here you are going to be, or to have, after telling the truth and recognize responsibilities, you will have about 8 years of limited freedom, and you have to produce results defined by the victims. But it's quite an important moment to answer the questions you are presenting now, because you know how to produce what we call also restorative justice, which is a justice which pretends not only to restore the victims and the suffering of the victims and to support the victims, but also to transform the perpetrators, the responsible ones. And because the idea is the construction of peace and the construction of reconciliation. And we are facing the moment, the problem just in this moment in Colombia. My impression is that victims, when they go through a process with personal support and a long way of conversations, not only among them victims, but also with the perpetrators, the people who have the responsibility of the crimes. People transforms all of them in the dialogue, and there is a hope of possibilities of putting together justice and peace.
Thank you. I think I'm getting the looks from Marianne to say we could be talking for another hour at least easily. We don't have that time, so can I pass back to Marianne?
Thank you so much. Thank you to Martha and to Father Francisco. It's been such an heartbreaking in some ways, but in other ways it has been it's been a joy to listen to you, to know that there is actually a bit of a glimmer of hope that's out there. So I want to hand over now, before I thank everybody for your participation, for being with us tonight. I want to hand back to Father Jim, into whose hands I want to put you to close with a prayer, please.
Thank you very much, Mary. I just want to finish with a prayer for peace that comes from the Bishops' Conference of Colombia. I'm sure Francisco and Marta are familiar with it. Father, you're an ocean of peace, and you grant us the gift through your Son, Jesus Christ, and the action of the Holy Spirit. You sow it in our hearts through conversion and reconciliation. You entrust us with peace, making it our responsibility, converting us into builders of peace, so that we build it with passion, patience, experience, and determination. You want our families to be schools for peace, where we listen to you, welcome you, and follow you better, so that words and gestures of forgiveness germinate, along with listening, dialogue, tenderness, love, and reconciliation, so that our children and young people may become protagonists of a peaceful future. Walk with us as we act upon our responsibilities in our social, political, economic, cultural, and church lives. Help us to spread respect for life, people, and creation. May we live in solidarity. May we be brotherly and sisterly and just, and may we work for the common good. Welcome into your homes those who have died in conflicts. Move the hearts of the perpetrators of violence so that they return to you and may also be committed constructors of peace. Strengthen the dignity of the victims and give them the courage to offer forgiveness. Mary, Queen of Peace, help us to open our hearts, to live out justice, forgiveness, reconciliation, and peace, so that a civilization of love may be born in our world today. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. And as I said, it's been something that I think we have to repeat, because people have so much to contribute, people have so much to learn, and I think that next year we will come back to you and ask you to do all of this all over again, so that we can keep up to date. We can talk again, perhaps to Police Scotland, with the knowledge that we've gained this evening. And again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Grace Thank you to Hugh and Niall, and thank you all for being here tonight. Your questions and your presence is much appreciated. So I don't know where you all are exactly, but I know that we have to say good afternoon and good night. And thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us. We
Thank you
continue.
for coming. Good night.